Wish is in fact one of the most disappointing Disney films ever released, and it's not even a question. One that represents the terrible year that Disney had for their own 100th anniversary, filled with the hubris of properties and a great misunderstanding of what got them here to the magic number in the first place that continued that long ago. Something I've come to see over the course of that year with each successive video I made in regarding the problems before and after, what general consensus would bring with the movie, worried about its potential, frustrated over its animation, disappointed in its release, problems with its villains, saddened by its hero, and of course, confused over its music. Where now, it has finally come time to fully explain from head to toe in this grand video of all the failures that should have never happened in the first place, ones that Disney themselves are probably upset at, beating the bush of taking our love for them for granted. I mean, because of that, they do deserve the failure since the standard should be much higher for what audiences expect from them, from the basic fact that they have survived this long and we should expect better. We have been there through tough times and how they have survived harsh challenges over the course of time, with the threat of ambitious films that could have shut down the studio if it failed, the government saving it through propaganda films in World War II, box office bombs that would have tanked their animation department, creating an era of the most spectacular films ever made, where they also watched the rise and fall of other animated studios competing over them. This studio is the pinnacle and heartbeat of the Walt Disney Company we know today and animation that we know today, and the reason for those other competing studios existing to some extent, founded by those who used to work at Disney Animation or those who grew up with it, anyone inspired by what it done and perfecting the techniques we all know today in animation. And it's important to talk about this because you also have noticed how much of a big fan of Disney I am, with most of my videos being dedicated to its characters and its movies and theme parks, which I always will stand by that, and my belief and interest in its storytelling from my childhood hero himself, Walt Disney, that makes me the person I am today, where I just cared too much to even stop. The negative trait that characters like even Asha say in this film itself, that I can't stop noticing because I want them to do better, and this represents a failure of trying to actually understand that. Where you have noticed in recent times that I am wearing a sweatshirt with Wish on the name and other videos that I release regarding this subject, where you do wonder, because of my negative feelings about the film, why would I even have the shirt that says the name? Well, it's a simple story. I just got fortunate enough to attend the early screening of the film before its official release, and they had this random raffle for any seat in the theater, which of course was my seat chosen, giving me these free items to take home from the studio, which I'm very thankful for, feeling like I was given this for a reason due to my enduring love of Disney, where like I said before, I just care too much and want the studio to produce fantastic films, and want something like Wish to be better than what it is, but also just feel saddened by the state that the company has taken itself into, producing mainly mediocre crap from executive decisions that are running it away from the core ideals of where it began with, those ones that Walt Disney that pushed and pioneered animation to what it is today. And that's why I take this opportunity and wear shirts like this to show and express my love. Where the failures of this movie has been drummed up enough to the point where it's been accused of being written by AI, which I feel is disingenuous to everyone who did work on it, where I know that never happened and was due to them not being able to find a great story to work out with the time that they were given, and I understand why that sentiment is there. That things like this should never be the end result with the talent they have and my respect that keeps my love of Disney alive for the people who work in the animation department, Imagineering, and the cast members who work day in day out to operate their theme parks overall. Because the truth is that has been presented is the fact that Wish is another box office failure for Disney, marking the end of their turbulent 100th anniversary, where at this moment it has only made around $240-ish million, around the max potential as the same as Encanto's total box office, where on the surface this might seem like a modest success with the $200 million budget, but it really isn't when you understand how budgets actually work in total gross of the money, taking that into account, resulting in a very big loss in the same trend similar with the Marvel's Indiana Jones, Haunted Mansion, The Little Mermaid barely breaking even, and Elemental being saved by word of mouth. A very bad sign for the company within the rise of streaming and other issues faced amidst the public. I mean, taking the whole company into account doesn't really affect them in their other avenues of revenue they make, which has also been increasing slightly despite this, but just a sign that people are upset at the direction that they have been taking, with Wish becoming the ultimate failure above all because of the fact it comes from the prime studio that is the heartbeat of its existence. I mean, sure, the positives are that it did make at least more money, around the same as its budget this time compared to say Strange World, which didn't even reach that number, becoming one of the worst box office bombs ever made that everyone forgot existed, having the lowest cinema score for a film. But this overall is barely an improvement in that regard for something regarded as a story a century in the making for a 100th anniversary film. still with an abysmal lower cinema score compared to the similar likes of Frozen 2 and Ralph, which again is just better than Strange World, but not by much again, considering it has the worst Rotten Tomato score for a Disney film since Chicken Little. Chicken Little, of course, being the worst Disney film in my opinion, where only 8 animated movies remain to be rotten by the studio, which of course I vehemently disagree with some of them amongst other things that the site offers, where this just seems not good at all considering most of their films were held within the majority of them liking it, where you simply have to agree with their assessment that nostalgia is no substitute for genuine storytelling magic, no matter how beautifully animated it might be. Where of course, if you have followed me in the past, I disagree with that last statement to some extent. I mean, yes, I have warmed up to it over time and think it is beautiful animation and should be remembered the way it is, including in the final product compared to the compression the trailers have shown online, with such beautiful watercolor backgrounds and art overall. But the feeling this film gives off with its animation, including the fact that traditional animation was considered in 2D for the entire film to pay tribute to, is something I really remain upset at, where this feels like a middle ground to try to stay within the style of conformity to how most of their animation is relatively the same now in 3D, but still also trying to pay tribute to the past and constantly just keep saying that they're going to be open to bring it back during both Frozen and Wish's release during their press tours. It's a feeling that comes more of disappointment from the direction, where I have no doubt that their intentions were good, especially with what I learned on the art behind the scenes, which is something I will talk a lot regarding this film, but it just seems off, like it just doesn't work because it's not committing to a certain style, feeling like an animated TV show you see on Disney Junior and not from Walt Disney Animation. Which of course, putting that together puts in valuable information to why the story ended up the way they did, where the reasons are very inspiring but under-delivered and something that comes off as shallow. Because when you think about the core idea of Wish, you realize it makes sense for them to try to do within the essence of what Disney storytelling is all about, encouraging people to make their dreams into reality and the journey of their heroes defeating their villains. It's something that can work regarding the formula while adapting to modern times as you can find fit. And you can see those elements in the film itself, having something that could pull off a lot of charm for what you love about Disney in the fairy tale aspect, but also still not enough to be as good as those past ones, where those characters at the end credits just remind you of the films that you'd rather see and watch because they actually have complete stories to tell and are better than this movie overall. Because again, as you will find out there was a story to tell in this film, but they just didn't have the time to tell it. That instead, they valued celebrating all that they were without showcasing all that they could. Because no matter how sweet a reference could be based on nostalgia, which is what this company values more than anything these days, it just does not make for a good story at all. Where I just wish, no pun intended, that these behind the scenes could have been a complete documentary instead of this simple footage like Into the Unknown and Sweatbox that tells a bigger problem with Disney productions not allowing the proper time of development for such stories, thinking about how Frozen 2 came out as awkward from the expectations that needed to be released that year, and then again here with a 100th anniversary film bent on trying to celebrate that. So with that all said, let's begin our journey into Wish, Disney's greatest disappointment. So now, let us begin at the very beginning, where in the first act of the film, Wish begins very similar to the first Disney fairy tales of Snow White and especially that of Sleeping Beauty, with the book opening and the narrator speaking, including the king and queen story. And I really like this style, to be honest, to pay such homage in terms of a fairy tale that is especially an original one on its own compared to the ones I just mentioned that are already based on those older books, featuring things like Walt Disney feature presentation that begins at the very beginning, since he did produce every single animated film up until his very death, just like he was telling his own story in a certain adaptation and towards the big screen, a book coming to life, and then diving into the realm of such a book, making it into a reality. It sets up the background of the Kingdom of Rose as well, within the intentions of Magnifico, wanting to find a better life after studying magic to form his own kingdom and granting wishes anyone desires with his own wife. Now this is important to learn later on because it is the simple foundation of Wish of both those characters who get together, where we find out that our narrator in this part of the film is in fact our main character herself in Asha. Now on the surface this might seem alright considering that we begin films with Snow White, who is already around the same teenage age and actually the main character, where Asha is 17 years old, but within the context of the other films and other Disney films in recent times, it just seems too abrupt to begin in order to get to the point of the day of her being her grandfather's 100th birthday, just like it was for Disney. It skips over a lot of development for her that I briefly touched on in my previous videos of her being a bad character because we don't learn anything useful about what motivates her other than what she tells us at the very beginning with a charming quirky attitude that really gets annoying real quick. Now, the prime reason they wanted her to be like this in this way was in fact of Ariana DeBose herself, who was very expressive, where they thought it was best to put such traits into the character, as most actors do give them such weight in terms of what we know from the past, with other characters like Robin Williams as Genie and so forth. But still, unnecessary and terrible that this was chosen because she isn't properly developed at this point, put into a collection of recent modern Disney trends that end up being the same personality, the quirky characters I just mentioned, that doesn't become its own, an amalgamation of those past, since it is a celebration of a centennial, which you will find other characters like the villain would definitely do, a story a century in the making, where in fact in this part she is hiding some details to become a surprise later, revealing that she wants to be the king's apprentice, more details that should have been explored early on within her character that should have been there from the beginning. This is where we have to compare her to previous heroes at this point in time, where for the most part, most of their stories begin when they're very young, either at birth or just a small child, with an event that shapes them to move forward. Again, this doesn't mean it has to be this way as the ones I mentioned with Snow White earlier, and how the Little Mermaid also begins when they're teenagers too, but mainly how these already have clear motivations and intentions from the beginning to end compared to this one. Like, she wants to help, but it's never explained why she actually wants to, or more elaborated with the facts that are developed later on. As I have mentioned before, this is a fact that's seen by her father, who died when she was very young, something only appearing twice in the entire film and never mentioned ever again in short small scenes that have something emotional to tell for her, but never really wants to explore that. Where again, when you think of the detail of Disney parents, these are the heart of what begins a Disney hero story, with their parents telling something that informs their path in some way until they die by the time the present story is shown. Where this film again follows the same dead parent path, but just does it much worse because the dad isn't really a factor or a character in how the story plays out, except for that one emotional moment. Now, I don't exactly know how much they were going to put in him as a character, since that's not really revealed in the behind the scenes footage too much, but there is a clear sign that he had a bigger purpose in the story, where the flashback in her mind in this wish showed us something that could have been explained in the beginning, like how it opened with the foundation of roses that could have played quite well into shaping her own character's motivations, wanting to help everyone to achieve their own desires, where the ultimate goal of her is to make sure that everyone can achieve their own wish while the villain protects something as long as it benefits him. Something that is alluded to a bit with our welcome song in Welcome to Rosas. And as said before, Welcome to Roses is a song that introduces us to the lackluster soundtrack of the entire film and how most will play out with its awful rhymes and unspecific purpose to the entire story. The reason I say that is because it's very similar in tone to the intro song of Encanto with the Family Magical, and something I've already mentioned in the music video that I did, where this one is more of a watered down version of such a thing without the same impact pertaining to its characters and how they are shown. And like I've said before, where I will say it again, I really don't think the songs in this film are awful. They work well again on their own for the most part, or just mainly sucked because the story didn't work out so well. No one was able to create a coherent vision because that's not what they were aiming for amidst the goal of celebrating 100 years. Because the intentions for getting another artist like Julia Michaels were actually pretty good, where she's definitely got great experience as a songwriter for many pop artists in what they would want for a different film, with Tom McDougall, executive music producer and president of Walt Disney Music, did while contacting them that they wanted to do something different back in 2020. That came 2 years after the release of Ralph Breaks the Internet, where she did a cover of one of the songs in the end credits, which was also the same year the idea of Wish went into development.
I was contacted by Mr. Tom McDougall at Disney. He knew that I was a big Disney fan and basically was like, "We're working on a new movie, would you be interested?" And I was like, duh.
Where they also revealed that she was involved within the background vocals of Demi Lovato's version of Let It Go, connecting her a bit to become a future choice as a songwriter. The fact that remains that she is indeed the youngest songwriter that they ever had in the entire studio's history, where of course she teamed up with Benjamin Rice to help along the way, as you will see with these songs. Where, as you will see over the course of time and over the course of the development of the film, most of these songs were kind of rushed to be developed, such as this song where Julia said they wrote this one to be the fastest to break the welcome song, which I don't think is a very good idea to begin with, including in such Disney films since they are musical theater, which requires both story and song meshed together within the overall goal. And that is why I compared it similarly to the Family Magical, because at least Lynn knew what was going on in the story, as Mirabelle was a character introduced as a child, wanting to get her gift, and then going later when she's a teen, telling a group of kids her family, diving more into the specifics of those gifts mentioned earlier, where we are kind of given a clue that she doesn't have that gift, the one we would saw at the very beginning before before it breaks into the present day. Mentioned earlier when we were kind of given that clue that she doesn't have compared to the Welcome to Rosa song about the kingdom that we saw at the beginning, where it gives more vague answers about what you can do with your wish.
You wanna dance on beat or to have hair touch down to your feet.
Sure, it goes into some specifics about what others have achieved, but it still does not learn much about Asha in that case, and trying more to reveal the darker underlying tone of Magnifico early on.
With lightning for hands and eyes that can glow. No, I'm totally kidding. But he is powerful.
Enough to justify him as a villain, considering that most of the recent ones don't at all. And I'll talk more about that choice later on, as we will get towards that with this wish because of how that plays into the real feel of the film. But the true main part about this scene is how it explains what happens with your wishes and what Magnifico does with them, that you forget your wish, giving it to him until he grants it one day.
Does it hurt? Do you cry? Oh, no, and you won't even miss it when you say goodbye.
Which already makes you question what that means compared to everyone else, including our own hero, who feels like this is a good thing for some reason.
Do you really forget your wish once you give it? You forget without regret.
The problem with that the story would have going forward to question such actions. Just like how Saba is now 100 and has not gotten his wish at all. Like, why is he now at an age that surpasses the average of most humans, especially at a time like this, where he has not gotten any such wish granted? Again, we don't have much to go off in the story because we have to get to this point early on in story to provide some conflict between these two main characters compared to those past points I just said. That it's never enough to accept what drives the movie forward because it still wants to provide a unique twist to it. Where, thinking about that twist now that I have said it, Magnifico is actually in fact another poorly written twist villain who was just introduced as a villain much early on and then turned evil by the end of the film in order to justify Disney fans and what they used to tell. Because this is the part where she rushes towards the castle in order to prepare to her interview, thus introducing us to her group of friends. This again is where they put their full personality and traits on display, being quirky and whatnot, and it's just completely horrible.
My mouth drooping? I feel like it's drooping.
Again, it's just not good because she is a hollow character with no real development and only serves to continue a worn out trend that needs to be changed in order to actually make a character work. There are more than just one character, Disney, why don't you do that? But anyways, this again is where we have to introduce her best friend, Dahlia, and her 6 other friends. The ones that show the other major tribute to Disney in their past by the fact that there are 7 of them having names with similar meanings to another group of 7 individuals in the first Disney film ever in Snow White. Because yes, indeed, the basis of Asha's friend group is in fact the 7 dwarfs, with Dahlia based on Doc, Simon based on Sleepy, Hal based on Happy, Safi based on Sneezy, Dario based on Dopey, Bazima based on Bashful, and Gabo based on Grumpy. Where thinking about that, you might think that this is a cute tribute, right? Well, you probably won't think that after when you realize that that is the only character traits that they are given for the most of the film, just helping out Asha. How they served no real grand purpose to the entire story other than to help without actually adding anything on their own based on those 7 dwarfs. Because when you see the original 7 dwarfs, they did have a purpose. They lived in a cottage and worked in the mine and helped defeat the evil queen at the end. Their personalities did carry over something distinct with what Snow White did as a movie compared to say a movie that uses them mainly as a tribute. I mean, that's not to say they don't have anything to add, because they have things that are good for some of the characters, but just not enough. For example, with what you see now in the characters is how Dahlia is infatuated with the king and how Simon was already of age and given his wish to the king as he is older than 18, a balance with Asha in the middle to get to that point.
You don't want to have to end up like Simon here, do you?
Which does indeed play a bigger part in the story as we will see later again, but barely enough to justify its existence among other things where Bazima just literally appears and disappears at moments when the movie calls for it. Because the real side character focus is mainly derived with Valentino, as we will find out later, to pay tribute to the talking animals of Disney's past and some sort of central figure that helps Asha out, thinking in terms of others like Olaf or Genie, but then again, those are singular characters that help the main group other than 8 other individuals who don't really have a story to add, being there for the sake of it. Again, easier to accept with what purpose Snow White had with the 7 dwarfs, but not with this wish with the entire kingdom filled with a variety of characters, including the next one being Queen Amaya herself, Magnifico's loving wife and consort of the kingdom. Now this is something that was important and is going to be important in this video because of what I saw was confirmed. One where you all know that she is a simple good-hearted queen of roses in the kingdom and the movie itself who sides with our main characters to do what is right for the people. Or in fact the truth that remained was in fact that she was going to be the co-villain of the story alongside Magnifico, that we were going to get a duo with a couple for the first time in a Disney film, which would have been very great. Because as we will go along to find fit in the story, there was a couple of deleted scenes introduced by head of story Mark Kennedy that went along with the fact that Amaya was helping Magnifico with his evil plans, that she indeed played a major part, but they removed such a thing because they wanted to put a rose-tinted picture of Rosas with its own leader in a good light for the most part while the hero learns that he is bad, that the priority was on the same mistaken idea that Disney found themselves in within the story rather than an actual developed villain, or villains in this case, of how characters ended up, where she is just as memorable in its final product as much as the 7 dorks are in this entire scene. And because of that, it just feels like something is constantly missing in this part since we are ready to meet Magnifico for the first time. Like there was something to be had early on, but we never got that and rushed to our next point in the plot. The point of Asha as a character, and of course Amaya, the 7 dorks, and Magnifico. And before we get to mention our meeting with Magnifico himself, is where I want to talk more about the animation itself, especially here inside the building with our main characters in view, where depending on the lighting of the scene, it just looks more like the regular 3D animated style that Disney has been doing rather than what the outside shows in terms of blending both the watercolor 2D style that harkens back to older Disney with its background, or just feel like they never wanted to leave that with what they built as we have said earlier. It's a half-hearted attempt to go back and do something different, but still never feeling like it wanted to do something different, as when you go into the behind the scenes, when you understand why they wanted to do so, getting to the older background paintings of the archive to tribute to the charm of the fairy tale of Walt's own day. And the work they did with what they had was great and they are talented in doing so, but it just doesn't come off as natural compared to if you stuck to one side. Sometimes depending on what you're doing, characters and the art look better in one style rather than both. The design of the characters are contradictory to the background if you get what I'm saying, where if you feel like they're alone, it just feels so standard. We're looking at the earlier test footage of Asha walking through the Pinocchio painting that they used to base the film off, and of course the other shots of the film that look similarly animated to the way the Spider-Verse uses less frames to actually animate, just look so beautiful in my opinion. It looks something different and makes the film more unique on its own rather than what they put in the final product with its design, feeling a bit more of a homage to those older Disney films. It feels distinct from what we have known previously that are more smooth in its animation rather than choppy because it expresses more movement. Yes, it's beautiful the way it is in some scenes, but it just doesn't feel like you commit to that when you look at it, or have it traditionally animated, which they refuse to do so, and leave it hanging for an eternal death sadly, the more they don't do so at this point in time. Like, why did you choose to do this other than actually creating shots that you wouldn't be able to do in traditional animation? You've done such actual rotating 3D shots in 2D before as demonstrated by The Little Mermaid, and something like this actually looks better because it actually expresses more movement. Like, why isn't that an option? Why does it have to stay within this relatively stagnant style? I don't understand. But anyways, besides the animation, let's get back to the point where we meet Magnifico, where this is indeed the moment that Asha gets her interview with the king himself, discovering the major yet pointless plot point of the book encased behind a glass. The reason I say this is because it's going to be used to justify Magnifico's villainous magic of sorcery, his turn to be wicked in a way similar to Maleficent and other Disney villains of the past, where we evidently have to continue with Asha's annoying act in order to sell her awkwardness when meeting with the king himself and explaining her reasons for wanting to be the king's apprentice.
Are you okay?
No, I mean, yes. I care too much.
Some sort of background to justify her wanting to help make wishes a reality, some of which I think are really cute and neat, like her animating a goat through her entire book, a very respectful nod to the art of animation itself, serving as a love letter for everyone who did work on either this film or all of the films involved beforehand when Disney started, the simple process which most people dream to animate, which of course she learned from her own father. I like this part the most in the entire film because it does represent the attitude that most have around animation, like making the villain question if it's talent similar to how the world of Hollywood constantly disrespects the medium of animation, especially when it comes to awards like the Oscars, and how our hero generally likes to do this being taught by our own father.
That is a unique talent. Do we call that a talent?
Something that really is a great character trait that should have been explored more. Her dreams of making drawings come to life as much as any other people in the kingdom loves entertainment. That this is the best thing to do for your hero to represent every animator that worked on these Disney films. But like everything else, they just chose not to explore that in great detail like her aforementioned father. We discover here that he was a philosopher who always looked to the stars to guide us, the basis of what this movie should bring in the supposed origin of the wishing star that we see in Disney films like Pinocchio. Learning that he died when Asha was only 12 and always constantly looked up to the tree to see the stars when he was indeed sick. It's very clear that she loved her father very much and held his beliefs deeply to dream, which his death actually caused her great pain. But then again, the film never fully elaborated on that further until that 1-second montage in the song This Wish Later, where nothing really again happens to see what came after that to shape her to the character that she is right now. Like I said, would have actually helped her character more at the very beginning, instead of just showing up like my grandfather deserves this wish and whatnot. Because again, for the most part, except for a few, Disney heroes begin their journey when they are very young children with their parents imparting important lessons that they carry throughout the film. How it's crucial in stories like The Lion King that carries the weight of each decision that they make. I mean, again, it's not fully necessary to do this as several other films have proved otherwise, but when you mention the fact that he existed as a character and her mother and grandfather are still alive and what she actually believed in, looking to the stars to guide them, you actually have to show something like that to make it work, and you didn't do that at all. Think here in terms of like Princess and the Frog and how that story carries over. At the very beginning of the film, we see how Tiana's hardworking father inspires her to dream of their own restaurant in the future, with the wishing star coming into play in that part as well, where her father also encourages her not to just wish upon that star as that is only one part, where you must follow through to see it come true. The work ethic that she became inspired by and to do later in the film because of her father, and also never losing sight of what was important to them in their own family.
Yes, you wish and you dream with all your little heart. But you remember, Tiana, that old star can only take you part of the way. You gotta help it along with some hard work of your own, and then, yeah, you can do anything you set your mind to.
And the same thing could have actually played out here with the same with Asha that makes the stars more important in the story that centers around that fact if he was a character rather than just a memory. That you were able to connect with such a character because you learned what their parents taught them and so forth that makes their journey special to begin with. And that is what the story needed, but it never did anything at all with that memory. Because it's a memory that also encourages Magnifico to share his own background and inspired him to found Rosas with his own family. This reveals a lot of character to him that is more sympathetic, that gives him a reason to become a sorcerer to protect the people from having their dreams destroyed, just like what happened to his own family due to selfish, greedy thieves.
Our lands were destroyed by selfish, greedy thieves.
A line that will become a source of irony later in the film due to the writing incompetence when he becomes a villain, where you really understand his motivations to want to protect certain wishes that we will see later. The reason why Asha also wants to help him, revealing the only secret that only a few can see, being the wishes themselves and of course the main driving force of the plot. We discover here that they are everything, that they are more than just an idea and are actually a part of yourselves, a part of your heart that dares to dream for more.
People think wishes are just ideas. But no, they are a part of your heart. The very best part.
And again, it's a layered meaning since Magnifico is the villain of this film, where on the surface you could see how it matters to them because they are dreaming of the people. They come to Rosas for better lives, just like how we come to Disney for better stories. The magic as if. Where this is when the most confusing song of the entire film comes into play with At All Cost. This is meant to compare and contrast that same layer with the villain and hero duet with a song about protecting wishes and what it means to them. This is actually the 6th hero and villain duet in Disney history, where the last one was in fact Love is an Open Door from Frozen 10 years prior, a song that really didn't fit for a villain but was also turned into one by that terrible twist as well, where the elements of such a song does not match up to what is later shown, where the same can be said here in terms of what it pertains to, but it feels more like a love song rather than what it's supposed to be. This is the other problem with the final film, where most people do point out that it sounds like the intention for something like this was for something else, as we will discuss later on. Something that's not fully confirmed at all for Asha's own character, but elements in the original demo do point out more towards that. Because when you hear that version, you hear Julia say wow before Asha begins her verse, and how promise was actually originally written as love. Things that match up again towards one point rather than singing to a bunch of spheres filled with people's wishes, like that is actually what you'd be singing to them. The song again is alright, but it hardly justifies itself to belong here when removing such a song doesn't change what happens after. Again, a problem you'll see with other later songs in this film compared to the previous ones of the Renaissance with the musicals, where removing them would actually destroy the very story's meaning. Where in most Disney stories, the I Want song usually becomes at this part rather than something like this. You know, like how before Love is an Open Door, it was the first time in forever, where in Hunchback, it was also a duet between our hero and villain that was in fact an I Want song too, and Out There, Waiting on a Miracle followed the intro Family Magical, How Far I'll Go followed the same intro of Where You Are as the second, where the point being here is that this part is where an I Want would play either in the first or second song rather than this. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to have this at all, but usually within the context we would actually dive deeper into our hero's motivations that are necessary, where this song doesn't really feel necessary as you can pull off main information without the song existing in the first place. Magnifico spends time looking at the wishes and Asha only finds her grandfather's wish in that part, where you don't really have to sing about that in order to find that fact out. But of course I understand what they were going for with what they wanted to separate the motivations in two different ways, either with the same tone of the song but never enough to justify it when the film travels along. Like, it becomes less important when you know where the characters actually end up, because after this part is where the earliest twist villain comes into play for Asha to learn. After the love song comes the truth that Magnifico is the main threat, because that makes total sense. Asha wants Sava's wish granted because he is turning 100 years old today for the king to consider, where he thinks that is beautiful and inspiring for future generations, just like how Disney has done for a century, but then transforms it into a threat.
Your Saba longs to create something to inspire the next generation. Great wish, but too vague.
Huh, just like this movie, where you kinda get his point and motivations for not granting such a wish.
Create what? A rebellious mob, perhaps? To inspire them to do what? Destroy Rosas, maybe?
Revealing that he only grants some and makes people forget it in the process. That people come here because they know they can't make it on their own, or some can't be granted because it would put the kingdom into jeopardy and in danger. Very understanding, as most wishes can destroy rather than create depending on the type of person.
No, if they're dangerous, then they can be stopped. But if they're not...
You've completely missed the point. People come here because they know they can't make their own dreams come true. The journey is too hard, it is too unfair. They give their wishes to me willingly, and I make it so they forget their worries.
But of course, like he says, it's more vague to why he can't grant it, as he tries to gradually reveal that he's a selfish king who desires to keep his own image up, as revealed later in the film, while also still contrasting with the fact that he also does this so his past wouldn't come back to haunt them and what he had built for everyone else, that they all came here under his protection for free to live, but he also decides not to actually grant everyone's greatest desire, which again is fine for a starting point to explore more, but then again it's not going to be commented on later on because the story still rolls on trying to prove these two conflicting sides of the character, and how Asha has to deal with the heartbreaking revelation that has some truth to it, like it wants her to actually fully resolve that point for everyone rather than a select few. Like, would she really grant someone's wish if it was to grab power for themselves or destroy something willingly, like the entire kingdom of Rosas? I wouldn't think so, because that is very dangerous, like Magnifico tries to portray Sabino in this regard, even though he is an old man who wants to play music. Because again, this film does not take a middle road, similar to the problem other films like Raya and the Last Dragon had with its painfully terrible message of trust, where you either fall on one side of the extreme to the next and not a balance in between that would make rational sense. Where in the case of Wish, it's just wanting to have everyone get their own wish, that they all deserve it no matter how good or bad that may be. But again, just never focus on that and do it only on a positive one note. Again, like the songs themselves, everything in this plot is too vague to really understand, or she does not get the position and gets to go home to tell her family the news. And this scene is alright on its own, but really needed more of her family to even work to justify it. Because remembering what I just showed you at the beginning without any greater context surrounding them is how we all know that there aren't memorable characters because they don't have very many scenes, and it just doesn't work at all because you have a dead father you hardly know about and then her own mother and grandfather whose just wish is at the center but never fully explored. Like, we only knew he wanted to play music when we saw the king for the first time, but never actually before that point to actually dive into that again and only justify the I Want of the song film in this wish. And this becomes the defining moment of the entire film, the song that should be the centerpiece of the motivations moving forward, where every action before and after does come from this one piece.
Isn't truth supposed to set you free? Well, why do I feel so weighed down by it?
And again, it's not a bad song having this sound that is actually very enjoyable to why it is the greatest of the bunch and why they promote it as such, but still left empty with no meaning back to its character or its theme.
If I could show them everything I've seen, open their eyes to all the lies, then would they change their minds like I did?
Because you notice how I said earlier that removing songs like At All Costs would change nothing about that very scene? Well, the same thing can be applied here if she just wishes upon a star and that's it, which is not a very good thing at all.
But when I speak, they tell me sit down. But how can I when I've already started running?
Yes, it's a good song that can carry its own weight beyond the film itself that it is a part of, but it also needs a reason to justify its existence in the film in the first place. Thinking in terms of back to Howard Ashman and his direction with The Little Mermaid and so on, that sparked the songs existing for Disney in the first place. Where Musker and Clement said that Howard said if you take a song from the script and that script still makes sense, then you haven't done your job properly. That you need the song to carry the meaning for the film to move forward, where the film would not work if it does not exist. Where everything here in This Wish just fails to work because its lyrics are too vague to even notice.
Oh, this is where we've been, but it's not where we belong. And I may be young, but I know I'm not wrong.
Of course, including things like the main chorus where I make this wish to have something more than this.
So I make this wish to have something more for us than this.
Where you don't even know what the hell this is if you didn't have those visuals at all, only minor references here and there, and that only makes sense if you've seen it compared to if the lyrics actually did pertain to such specifics like Part of Your World and most of the other Disney songs. Yes, it begins to allude to the events we just witnessed like Magnifico and her family telling her otherwise, but you wouldn't have gotten that on your own if you listened to the song. And this comes from the main problem of the fact that it was the first song ever written before the entire story came to play, where Julia said that it was based on a very short paragraph of the film itself. The actual synopsis where it essentially said it's about a young woman who lives in a kingdom with an all-powerful king. He keeps his wishes here, and she finds out that he's not as charming and kind as everyone thinks, which sparks her very courageous, very brave, selfless journey to get the wishes back for the people in her town. Of course, delivering things like the demo in the process. Something that the producer said actually informed the story as a whole.
The demo she delivered is This Wish. Of course it evolved, but what's really cool about that song is that it also informed the storytelling. So having that song early on helped you all continue to find the movie.
Which, sorry to say, but that actually is a lie because the demo version is in fact the simple final version by the lyrics itself.
So I make this wish to have something more for us than this.
Not the beat of course in that version, where they never actually changed it at all, with what had been released keeping the song the same without creating the story around it. Like that is the simple demo that was made before the entire film came into play, compared to these previous songs I just mentioned that were crafted around the story at the same time. Now it isn't bad for that to happen as that is the centerpiece of the film, but in that regard to the story, it still needs to be worked to make sense around it like they did with Part of Your World. Again, thinking in terms of how directors were involved and changed some things around for Ariel's character to make sense, while Howard still put in his version intact within that very context, to carry from beginning to end, not just with the song, but the story. But this one just didn't, and it's blatant it's a first draft by the lyrics itself that constantly rhyme and makes no sense like caution to every warning sign.
So I look up at the stars to guide me and throw caution to every warning sign.
Which means she's going to be safe, rather than of course risky like throwing caution to the wind would normally mean, where being safe is not what her character is supposed to do, especially going against the king. Yes, most of it is beautiful, but you leave things too open where it doesn't quite work, showing her father again here, like I mentioned so many other times, for 1 second and that's it.
If I could just be pointed in any given direction on where to go and what to do. My legs are shaking, but my head's held high the way you always taught me to.
And when you look at it from that perspective, this song is just far from finished. These short scenes feels like it belongs in an unfinished movie and why it doesn't carry like it should. I cannot connect to a character unless I really know what drives them, like she just says, why they want to be in the position that they are in or forced in if others say no. It is digested in the simplest of forms without any effort to elaborate on that, to make it stand out the way it needs to be, created around the basis of an I Want song that should be the popular thing hitting the charts and the fact that it is the company's 100th birthday that celebrates that. It needs to be centered around that to give reason to the next part of the movie that plays out the way it should, rather than still making sense if it never existed.
So I make this wish to have something more for us than this.
Because, after the song ends, it's the part that the wishing star finally comes down, the turning point that blesses our characters but negatively affects our villain by the way the wishes move, an upset to the balance of power that he held, destroying the only part that made him a justifiable villain before seeking our cute, marketable plushie for the first time. Where yes, I am talking about our lovable star who doesn't talk at all but answers the prayer of Asha's song to come to help, to play into the origin of the wishing star that Disney stories are already known for. Where this is the part where we have to talk about the deleted scenes that are mentioned from before, because in the current state of the film, we have a cute little creature that Asha is surprised at that is supposed to be the wishing star that came from above that is now floating around and spreading the sparkling dust on the creatures below enough to give them the ability to talk. Where in earlier versions of the story, Star was a character that also talked and was given a predominantly male form to interact with Asha. He was a shapeshifter who changed into multiple forms that still gave reference to other Disney characters being a form of pure energy, one that actually gives more reason to learn the origin of it. And of course, with what we learned from before in At All Costs, that makes more sense if Asha was able to connect to the star and have some sort of relationship with what her father knew and taught her to guide with the motivations of the movie. Something that some people said, why couldn't we have a love relationship between Star and Asha? I mean, it's not fully confirmed at all, it isn't even mentioned in the behind the scenes footage that much, but it actually makes much more sense the more you think about it in terms of these two characters. But instead, they just found this dynamic to be more interesting the way it actually finally played out, where she needed to be the hero and do most of the work compared to this one that would have been too powerful to help.
The scene was changed because we felt that while seeing Star change into different animals was fun, it was similar to other Disney characters we've seen, and we liked the idea of Asha and Star bonding with each other and communicating without Star talking. Also, the ability to change into anything made Star very powerful. We really wanted Asha to be our hero, and we wanted her to have to solve all her problems by herself without too much help from Star.
The problem that later transferred into Magnifico at the end of the film before he gets defeated by the way they all sing, where this song serves as a reason to justify that ending and explain how people are connected to the stars by the song I'm a Star. Now, this song is just weird because it doesn't explain Star's character very well, what his purpose is and the reason for his existence. Instead, it's done to multiple characters that Disney is known for in the talking animals to create a positive message about being who you are.
Have you ever wondered why you look up at the sky for answers?
That we are all made up of stardust, hence why the star came down all of a sudden to help, which unfortunately still does not explain anything at all in the problem of making Star a mute character.
Well, you don't have to look too hard. We're here for all your question marks. If you're trying to figure out just who you are,
You're a star!
If Star could talk, this could actually explain a lot of relevance connected to Asha. Yes, her father said that they were connected to them, as she mentions at the end, and why it makes sense to this song, but this still doesn't explain anything at all because he never again existed in the story. Like, you aren't telling me why exactly we look up to the sky for answers because the song only dives into what you're specifically made of.
So your dust is my dust? Fantastic!
Discluding the reason why Star has come down at this very moment. Like, why didn't the star come down at any other moment if someone wanted to make a wish on his tree? It just is very hollow where the plot needs to continuously move on to the next point, just like this next line.
if I'm explaining this poorly, well, I'll let Star do it for me.
It's all quite revelatory. We are our own origin story.
Like, how are you going to justify lines like this when Star doesn't even talk? This really seems designed for a whole different version or just the amalgamation of what they could due to constraints of working with the 100th anniversary film to get it on time for that year. Being a star just does not explain any fact to its own origin story. Sure, it's about making our own path in life that matches with the idea or view Asha has about the wishes of everyone's own desire, but who's to actually say this actually helps understand who Asha is again, or Star in this case? But I guess it's fine because we can have this hilarious bear say this.
Yes!
But moving away from this entire song leads us back to Magnifico pondering what to do with this mysterious magic, again mentioning for the second time and last time of the film that he's trying desperately to stop his childhood from ever happening again.
Everything I do is to make sure that never happens again.
Still understandable at this point, but then getting more questionable by how erratic he's becoming, using all options including using that mysterious book that is never to be touched upon unless emergencies, that he almost goes for the book for answers until his lovely wife pulls him back to reality to confide in the public.
You command great magic, but with this book, I fear it commanding you.
where it also sort of reveals his narcissistic traits apparently at this very moment, that he just loves himself.
You are their handsomest, most beloved king.
You're right. I am a handsome king.
This is done because it's one trait that tries to harken back to the mode of other previous Disney villains without providing an actual structure for him to be moded on his own, where he has his twist just like the other recents and now has personality traits similar to Gaston or Jafar in a reserved manner. But the main thing to point out about this scene is how both of them are together, where Amaya is pulling him back, that she doesn't want him to go down a dark path and trust in the people that they rule over, where of course he clearly does that as he does love her, as does she. Where thinking of that, it still would have worked better if you know she was a villain too, as we just mentioned. In the first deleted scene that is shown, introduced by Mark here, he explains that both of them were indeed evil and Amaya also had an evil pet cat.
Magnifico and his wife Amaya were both evil in this version, and Amaya even had an evil pet cat named Charo.
Which still would have kept in line with the reference of past Disney villains and Disney with Lucifer being the pet of Lady Tremaine, or similar to Diablo being the pet companion of Maleficent, and Ursula with Flotsam and Jetsam and so on. But they just didn't decide to do that.
The scene was changed because we didn't want people to know Magnifico was evil right away. We wanted to have the people of Rosas love Magnifico, and have only Asha be the one to realize he's not as good as he seems. Also, it served the story better to have Amaya be a good person who starts to question Magnifico's evil ways.
This scene also ties back into the star up above as he's introduced as a character, which gives more weight to his appearance and involvement with Asha of two who want to have power in the world, introduced fairly early on in the story, where even he wants to eat the wishes when he's angry. All things that point to a clearer and better character, or characters in this case, for the entire story.
And everyone knows that traitors deserve to lose their wishes entirely and forever.
Everything I saw and heard in this deleted scenes sounds 100% much more better than what we are getting in this movie and right now at the scene with the good-hearted Queen Amaya. It just feels like it harkens back to older Disney better with a clear villain that we associate them with that had so much attitude and expression, while also doing something that is different with the villainous duo. Thinking in terms of other movies in regards like Puss in Boots: The Last Wish that separates its villains into 3 distinct parts to fit the story perfectly to what they wanted to tell, where it makes sense if you get what they actually wanted without feeling overloaded, where having more than one is just great to prove your point, and having a couple where most Disney stories usually involve one on the heroic side would also be a nice twist on its past and future. But for some reason, they never thought that was a good idea for the story. They just wanted to focus on the fact that people love him for granting wishes and that Asha is the only one who has to find this out at the very beginning, where good Amaya fits this story better to question his actions as he goes darker, where they just didn't know why Magnifico wanted to star in the first place, hence why these characters ended up the way they did. Where speaking of that, we also have to include this other deleted scene when Star had a voice that also included Amaya in it still being evil to the plot, showcasing his shape-shifting powers. This is something that doesn't make any sense to me because it adds more character to both Star and Amaya compared to the finished film, more than what they are in the final product with their characters, remembering how little that they add. Again, this was justified by the fact that Asha had to be the hero to solve her own problems rather than a powerful shapeshifter at her side. Like, seriously, these storyboards feel more like an actual Disney story rather than this final product, and it really frustrates me the more I'm seeing it. I mean, not that the scene would be necessarily be involved in this part, but how we actually now are entering the stage that Star gets integrated into the plot to get Sabino's wish. A part that is of course to remind us and involve that our 7 dorks again exist in the film to have some character, helping Asha with her newfound friend with the best song in the entire film being the chicken song. This is all done for 2 purposes: to have them help like Dahlia giving access to the king's study without him noticing at all, and for the friends to actually act like friends to keep their mouths shut and shut up about the truth and Star. The latter of which I say because one of our characters is going to betray the gang for the sake of a shocking twist yet again, which I won't say for spoilers since this is a long review after it's out and nobody else cares, where it's all delegated to be Simon in this case. As we learned earlier, Simon was already 18 and gave up his wish to the king, which makes Star sad.
I can't remember what I lost.
But this isn't done very well enough to understand amongst their group. Sure, he gave up his wish, but that's all we know about him, where other characters like Gabo who have more personality could be more likely to give him up since he distrusts and fears Star, only knowing that the king could authorize magic use. But again, it's all too quick when the king calls for a meeting when Dahlia has to help her to get up in time while stalling the king who seeks to find the person who caused the magic, where Dahlia's main character, besides being Asha's friend, and based on Dog from Snow White, is the fact that she adores Magnifico.
With our velvety, sweet buttercream of a king.
How she loves him even if he has a wife already already in some scenes, where this is the moment where things have to transform to help her best friend over her love of making Magnifico cookies. To the point where we are trying to question his leadership as brought up by the other citizens. Other citizens where I would like to mention in this quick scene almost look exactly the same in some shots. Because if you watch the film, you will notice that some characters look very similar, thinking in terms of their models or overall style. They did have good intentions with the cultural mix in this region serving as a crossroads and the design of some characters harkening back to traditional animation, but many of the designs of various characters do actually repeat. Like as you see here, I thought this windy character with the blue dress was the same one as Asha actually greeted at the very beginning with a different color dress, but was actually a different character, and so was this one, where they still are somehow literally the same model. I have to show you this because they did talk a lot about the work that went into the background, where the characters just don't feel as unique as they wanted to be for that cultural mix of Wish just for everyone. It's just vastly disappointing and very cheap in that regard for a story that's about everyone's unique individual story, thinking in terms of Disney's path, with other films like Encanto showed some side characters have a lot of emotion put into them with their own individual traits, their own designs that make them unique and stand out, where only the minor background characters could be the same model to populate the world rather than the ones up front and close, that they have a distinct personality and connection to the story that makes it feel more alive. Where it's just become a major problem in Disney, where in their modern 3D animation, they have just reused assets like Ralph using baby Moana at the end of the film, and how Elsa and her mother in their coronation model are literally the same model, where now in Wish, it just feels like certain characters are simply colored differently and called differently wearing the same types of clothes in other situations. For a movie of its caliber, it should have something more distinct from its main characters, and we sadly aren't getting that at all. I mean, I hate to see it, but this film is just so lazy for what it attempts to do, all thrown away for the sake of referencing its past. Where everything, of course, has to lead to the most infamous part of the entire film itself that is going to be remembered for quite some time in the villain song, "This Is the Thanks I Get." And This Is the Thanks I Get is the first Disney villain song discounting Love is an Open Door since Mother Knows Best Entangled. And overall, even more than this wish, this song just represents everything disappointing about this movie, from its lyrics to its tone that doesn't know what it even wants to be, justifying Magnifico's turn into villainy for the sake of villainy that we usually expect from Disney.
I can't help it if mirrors love my face. It's genetics. Yeah, I got these genes from outer space.
It's one that really wants to be just like the other Disney villains by including traits similar to Gaston, by making him this complete narcissist with all of these accomplishments and all about himself, and of course his lust for power similar to other characters like Scar or Maleficent, without understanding why those villains worked the way that they did, or the ones that actually had songs in that regard. But of course, over the time of analyzing this movie, I will admit that I in fact enjoy the song for what it is, but still never enough to justify its existence for the villain as a villain song, poorly structured on what character development they already have and why the soundtrack just didn't click so well. Because as it begins, you'll notice its reliance on using modern day attitudes with its lyrics, which is fine in some spurts, but gets to a point where it doesn't make any sense at all to use. Because when you compare it to previous Disney villain songs, it just seems so out of place because they're a certain style and they're supposed to invoke a certain feeling for that very character, ones that feel darker depending on the certain type of villain, where sadly this one just sounds like a pop song.
Keep the name, I'm magnificent. I put the I in omnipotent. I'm passionate, I'm not petulant. Someone praise me for my benevolence.
As you can see in verses like this, it's all about rhyming with each other, beginning with "Peep the name, I'm magnificent," where its attitude and tone really feels out of place even with the rest of the soundtrack, even with the background vocals covering it.
I'd give the clothes off Benito's back. If you really needed that, I'd be the first one to volunteer. Henry, if your home were to crumble, or if you were in trouble.
Because there's literally nothing to go off for him to be like this to justify his narcissistic twist, since we already had some info that contradicts his with his tragic backstory that shaped him to found Rosas. Like, that is clearly a different character from whoever this person is.
We had talked in many directions about Magnifico, and one of the things we also understood is the audience wanted to know why he was the way he was. They wanted to understand him.
And that's the difference from the other Disney villains, is that they come on the scene fully evolved as a villain. We watch Magnifico become a villain.
It's his origin story.
It is, yeah.
What's really cool about this villain is that he's initially very charming, and how do we make him charming but then figure out the turn?
And it's painful to see him this way because they wanted to harken back to those older past Disney villains, but understanding nothing about why they worked at all. Gaston and his song worked because his character was introduced just like that from beginning to end, and it fit the attitude and tone that the movie was trying to go for. In The Lion King, Be Prepared worked because it further established Scar's intention to rule with the same green effect that the song would do, and Hellfire really connected to the feelings that Frollo had for this one person. But this one just doesn't have it all because there is a small background to the character that contradicts what should have been aimed for in the beginning, especially with those deleted Amaya scenes where both of them were clearly villainous from the start. Characters that would have required a much more villainous sounding song than whatever this is because they had two instead of one. And if we realize that, then you realize how bad this version really is just for that one villain.
There is a strong aspect of comedy and playfulness in this character that we wanted but somehow hasn't gotten there yet.
When This Is the Thanks I Get came in, I said, oh good, we've got a narcissist. I can play with a narcissist, and oh good, he's funny. So for me, that's where the fun came.
Where of course, it finally ends with a pre-chorus with the most infamous line that everyone memes on from the entire film, known as
I let you live it for free and I don't even charge you rent.
And this is something you do not want to write because it is a tautology and emphasizes the fact that the songs were just not well developed from their initial demos. Like This Wish was developed before anything was worked on the film, and so on that they just said, where this just feels like it's not developed.
I clean up all your messes and I'm always there when you need defense.
Sure, I actually do accept this line now because of the fact that Magnifico is a character whose head is up his own ass right now celebrating himself, where it makes sense that he repeat the same thing twice that isn't true. But then again, most villain songs actually do seem well developed, like they know what they want, where each villain, like Magnifico, comes across as a bit intelligent. They're not 100% stupid, where they know exactly what they need to do. Where this one didn't seem to do as such, with the ending in the chorus that continuously repeats the line in This Is the Thanks I Get with the background vocals.
And all I really want is just a little respect. And this is the thanks I get.
Where the more you hear it, the more you actually get confused because that isn't a tone a villain song would usually have that is more on the side of a regular pop song than a musical would actually put in.
And this is the thanks I get.
I mean, again, Chris Pine does sound great in it, but it hardly fits for someone they described as an intelligent sorcerer, because none of these older Disney sorcerers that we have seen before would ever say something akin to this.
See this kingdom, I built it up, and you still complain, ungrateful much. Are you sure that you're not the prob? I'd love to see you try and do my job. Oh!
Like, what the hell is this? What is with these anachronistic lyrics that is needed for modern Disney films at all? That just doesn't fit for what we learned in an intelligent sorcerer king who wants to have his kingdom be protected, that he has justifiable reasons to want Rosas be safe and why some wishes can't be granted, where this is just contradictory to that entire message. It's just utterly confusing and utterly deranged, to be honest, where it's all meant for his entire turn of his evil character because of the book that he uses. The book to find out where this magic is coming from and become the villain he was meant to be because of that book.
To this book I don't want to be tethered, but desperate times call for desperate measures. Where was I? Oh yeah.
And that is why this song represents the disappointment of this entire movie, because it again wants to do something different but still stay within a similar style.
And this is the thanks I get. This is the thanks I get.
I get what you were aiming for with the character, where its basic premise does sound great for a villain who's already positioned up at top, but you still failed at the basic essence of what a Disney villain brings.
This is the thanks I get. This is the thanks I get.
And the book is the only justification for any of this to happen. To have the king have the same green magic that is similar to Maleficent, or the same tone that Scar showed with his own song and be prepared for his own evil plan. A terrible plot device to use because it wasn't explained very well, other than the fact that you have to stay away from it and only use it in a tonally confusing song. Where the only thing you can think and say at this moment is of course,
This is the thanks I get.
But thankfully, Asha and Star are successful in getting Sabino's wish back and going back to their home to discuss this, where I have almost forgotten to mention Valentino in this conversation, played by the great Alan Tudyk, Disney's lucky charm who has been voicing these characters in their films since Wreck-It Ralph in 2012. Where when you think about modern Disney, you can probably say that he is the defining feature of the revival 3D era of their animation. It's something that I love myself for those little cameo moments where he played a variety of characters, including those mostly animal ones that you wouldn't have known were voiced by him, that makes it into the background, giving such life to them and a reason why Valentino was made as such. And while the concept isn't bad to have, the direction they went for him just became so unnecessary and very annoying despite his talents.
Did you see what just came out of that one's mouth?
Like he's literally made for nothing but comic relief the moment he's placed and given a voice, to a point where you don't actually lose anything if he wasn't even involved in the first place. Yes, you have something that fits the Disney image of talking animals and dreams that can come true, but you use it in a way alongside the rest of the film that just doesn't make any sense, where it just has no great value other than a possible few laughs from the kids. It's where you also have to look into Disney's past and see that not all animal sidekicks need to actually talk at all. Their charm could just be found right there and then with the animation itself, and that delivers the same amount of quality without making it too goofy or vice versa. But alas, we gotta actually include the butt jokes and the funny references because that's so better. Make it into a kids film rather than into a family one that we all love. Anyways, besides that point, Asha finally gives back Saba's wish and he feels so happy for what he lost, with something so simple yet so beautiful to inspire longing to pursue it for himself before Magnifico suddenly burst in finding it out just like that, just like 2 minutes after his entire song just ended. I mentioned that lousy fact because this is where we actually have to mention an almost finished deleted scene that plays out, where if you remember at the end credits, there is a song that is sung by Julia Michaels that she created alongside the others known as A Wish Worth Making, something that really celebrates wishes of Disney's 100 years with the characters scrolling down in the credits itself, where it was actually intended to be in this part of the film with Sabino playing that it was instead sung by his voice actor Victor Garber, who most of us actually know from Titanic as Thomas Andrews and actually has performed on Broadway. Because in the bonus features, directors Chris Buck and Fawn Vera Sunthorn mentioned that this scene was meant to show what it was like for someone who wished all their life, especially a 100-year-old.
In this moment in the film, we want to portray what it's like for someone to have their wish returned to them. When Julia first heard about this beautiful moment, she was so inspired to write a song for it. We used to have Saba dancing around to an upbeat song, and Julia brought this concept of a bit of a nostalgic feeling, the bittersweet moment of finally reunited with your wish.
And Victor gave us a gorgeous performance. You feel all the emotion that someone who had wished all his life for something finally gets it back. It was one of the hardest things for us to cut. What happens a lot of times is that the movie tells you what it needs, and so you really have to listen. Luckily, again, we found a way to have it in the movie somehow, and that's right at the very end.
As you can see, they did like it, but sadly cut it out because the story already told something similar like that overall with the message and the goal of Asha and the wishes themselves, which just kind of actually hurts because it would have strengthened it a bit more, where the runtime wouldn't hurt to be longer as there have been other Disney movies that are way longer than this was. It just adds a passion that was missing from a character that really isn't very memorable out of his own wish, feeling more complete than all of the other songs we just mentioned, especially that of the villain and the hero song.
'Cause any wish that's got your heart on the edge of breaking is a wish worth making.
This really relates a lot to the subject at hand in one way, being so simple without adding anything else like the others do that are out of place with the rhymes and whatnot, where it just doesn't make sense to why you had to cut that out, feeling like a song that would actually play in normal Disney musicals that do work. I mean, it's not like that performed like a regular song you hear in a film, but it actually seems more natural to the plot and course of the characters, you know, such as Krista's own song Reindeers Are Better Than People, which isn't really a main song, but it's still there and it's already charming the way it was. was. The point that I want to emphasize here is the fact that you have these characters that could give reason to anything that was being done. Sure, it doesn't do much in the overall final film at all, including these two very much, but it still would have made it much better if you actually did include it. It just doesn't make sense that you're cutting valuable information to the characters that would straighten its story, the development that was missing from beginning to end. Because the fact remains, in the current state of the plot, Magnifico mysteriously finds out it was Asha all along who gets the star and tries to justify to her own face that he is indeed a threat that must be stopped without getting to that point very well in the beginning.
I feel as if I can do anything.
It's just very hollow again, moving quickly along so we can get to our eventual climax to achieve the end of our journey, rushing our family to safety, where Star and Asha have to come up with a plan to free everything else from Magnifico. And this is where we also have to mention another deleted scene from earlier versions of the film that actually included more of Sabino too, where I'm honestly very astounded to how much these scenes would have made for a better film than this, involving more of the side characters to become competent parts of the story rather than a forgotten distant memory if you just watch the film one time. In this early story, Asha's family is hiding from Magnifico in the small village that keeps their wishes a secret so Magnifico couldn't steal them. The part where his villainous character was fully villainous with his wife, so it seems to match the entire tone. The village writes their wishes on colorful ribbons so they know what desire they want, where Sabino collects them and lies them down on a tree that looks similar to the one she and her dad spent time together. It matches the point where they say the family actually hid from Magnifico, but was clearly much more early on as Valentino was still the goat that didn't speak at all. This one adds more weight to Sabino's character because he did hold a certain wish when he was a little boy that never came true at all from Magnifico as he reached the age of 100, where it revealed that his character was sick in this version and actually died shortly after. Which, thinking about it, it does sound a lot better to be honest now that I've seen it. I mean, not the fact that he dies is better like that, but how the story actually carries much more emotional weight for all of these characters, further straightening Asha's journey and development to stop our villain by having more background to them and causing more consequences to her character along the way.
So Sabino takes Asha to see the wishing tree, and he tries to convince Asha to fight back against Magnifico by showing her everyone's unfulfilled wishes, and by reading Asha passages from her own diary that reveal her secret burning desire to live in a better world. You can see in this scene that Sabino is a little bit sick, and in this version of the film, he actually died shortly thereafter. The scene was changed because we took out the idea of a hidden village. We thought it would be better for everyone to love Magnifico, want to live in Rosas, and want to give him their wishes. That way, when Asha finds out about Magnifico's true evil nature and tries to tell people, nobody believes her, and that makes fighting against him much harder for her.
Like, why was this story scrapped? It sounds significantly better than what we actually got and matches that of the other Disney stories with the heart they have to tell.
No one should have to live and die without a chance to make their wishes come true.
It just doesn't make any sense the way it would finally turn out for the sake of references to Disney on a scale equal or only marginally better than Ralph Breaks the Internet's own circle jerk of Disney scene. Where I really don't agree with that, with what they explained is better by having everyone want to live and admire the town of Rosas for what it is until the very end, because the city's own desires are just not well developed or questioned properly at all, feeling rushed and underdeveloped as hell. An event like this does make total sense, where not everyone can achieve their own desires in life, and makes you fight a whole lot harder for it, giving new motivations to the next generation and the next 100 years that follow off for the better rather than the worst that Magnifico keeps doing right here. Such as the fact how he's actually parodying the evil queen right now at this moment. Not an homage like they want you to believe, because of the fact that they're now just abusing it to a level that does not need to exist for this movie and removes the point of the story. The story is becoming akin to other films like DreamWorks and Shrek and so forth that parody Disney at this moment with its various references, where now you see him reach a point similar to Asha and the quirky Disney females of becoming an amalgamation of Disney's past, like being a narcissist similar to Gaston, having a royal sly demeanor similar to Scar, the pure evil nature of Maleficent, and the black cauldron of potions concocted by the evil queen, all without making him his own character at the point to satisfy disappointed fans who we know haven't had a real Disney villain in a decade at this point.
You dare to question me and all that I do for you. You don't deserve to be granted.
But sadly, this isn't what we want. We don't need a villain that has to be torn apart with sympathetic motivations and classical evil villainous moments, remembering what I just put earlier to how they actually wanted this to be his origin story as a villain, even though by the end of the film he becomes the magic mirror, and we all know how that turns out, with only one well thought out point that sticks to that nature. Don't overcomplicate your story because you feel the need to celebrate 100 years when you already had a short that can do all of that by itself. Just do something that makes sense for a villain and stick to that nature. A fact that's even more disappointing considering the fact that Amaya has to witness all of this in fear to turn everyone against him instead of being the villain we mentioned earlier with this incessant need to have everyone just like him, which is never true in any case in any society to have. Unless the movie was an actual critique of modern Disney itself, which Magnifico otherwise represents perfectly, with the song This Is the Things I Get, of course, and everything else about his character. There's just no reason for you not to provide two sides of the story between the belligerent king who keeps it all for himself and the people who do want their own wishes for the betterment for everyone else, which is what is alluded within the present queen's character, that he is their loving king that she spent time with building this kingdom up for the reasons that were good-hearted rather than unjustifiable turn to the dark side by a book. Remembering, in doing so to make most of these people good and trusting the king, you relegate them to almost nothing as seen in the next scene where he tries to find the traitors, where of course they reveal that Simon told the king about what happened, which to everyone's surprise is shocking, especially to the entire group who promised to help. But again, as I just mentioned earlier with his character, this is just totally undeserved because there was hardly any development other than the fact that you gave up his wish to the king, which of course was the only reason why you chose him to reveal this stupid plot point, all because of his age, but still had no character to understand or connect to Asha at all in that way. Nothing the seven dorks do in this entire film really does matter, and now they're all thrusted into the fray as traitors as he names them by Magnifico's own green magic control.
There are 6 more traitors, Your Majesty! Dahlia, Garbo, Dario, Safi, Hal, and Basima!
This just isn't well thought out in any way you could put it, being also the second time Disney has wasted Evan Peters in their project since WandaVision's Quicksilver gag, because Ralph Boner is a funny name.
Boner.
At least that wasn't the worst thing the MCU has done now considering how terrible it is. Where, at the same time, Asha sends a message to the queen to encourage her to do the right thing to stand up to this terrible turn and diminish her character further into relative obscurity, or what I like to actually call now, the conspiracy theory where she is secretly evil and wanted to rule, disposing her own husband by the end of the film. Where you kinda see how shallow this is by having all of Asha's friends, apart from Simon, rush out as they're now deemed traitors where she now has to find them. It just doesn't feel earned or rewarded by any action they did at all because they hardly ever existed outside of the city and what was needed to be there, where evidently they find Bazima's secret hideout because of a butt joke.
Ooh, good find, Valentino.
My butt found it.
But anyways, this starts us off with our next song in Knowing What I Know Now. Now this was honestly the first of one of my favorite songs of the film, but sadly again just never worked with how such characters ended up. Because this is meant to be Asha's rallying call to her friends to rise up against Magnifico's tyranny and release all of the wishes back.
You've been deceived. Magnifico is not the man he claims to be.
Where it just doesn't work because everyone was so haphazardly thrusted into this position. Like it could have worked as it pertains to something dangerous that the king has done to his people, but that actually requires more involvement from the actions from the side characters to do so.
If it's not us, then who and when? If we don't fight, he knows he wins. Not allowed. Knowing what I know now.
Where Asha sings her verses is where Dahlia decides to join in to the rally, saying that she's not the only one fed up.
Get up, yeah. No, I'm not the only one that's fed up, yeah.
But this does not make any sense because about less than 20 minutes ago, we featured a scene where she was just admiring Magnifico just like the rest of the town, where it was never given enough time to justify this type of action for a character because it was thrusted in. I mean, yes, she has to say that because she was deemed a traitor, so forth with the actions of the king himself, but it just doesn't work because it was never clear enough that that needed to happen, needing to mention yet another deleted scene in this moment before we continue. This is yet another deleted story tale late in the movie that had Sabino and Asha's mom captured by Magnifico, where Asha and her friends tried to capture them. This included another deleted character from the film named Flazino, another friend who was the apprentice of Magnifico. And in that same scene, Dahlia shows up in the dungeon put there by Magnifico himself, where she was also named Dishin by what you can hear.
Asha! Dishin!
She's okay.
Where this is when Ariana DeBose was actually involved within the filming, hence why her voice is featured in this deleted scene instead of just the animators for Asha. Where this actually makes much more sense to justify the one that loved Magnifico now being put down by him, to justify her turn and rallying call that is featured in the final film, especially because of the fact that she is disabled, walking with that cane, where the writers in the behind the scenes footage actually talk about that being a big deal to relate to their own struggles, and more important to inspire other kids who actually have disabilities but just didn't work because nobody could care much for Dahlia as a character. And this one just provided much more with the king himself that she admired, putting her down because of that disability in the scene, saying that she's a burden that nobody would mess with and not grant their wish. Like, why is every deleted scene so much better than the actual movie? Why were these concepts thrown out at all? It makes more sense and makes you fight to believe in each individual's desire and personality. And it doesn't make sense in the final film because this scene again was affected by the fact that Amaya was still evil in this version.
Now the scene was changed because as the story shifted, Amaya went from being an evil queen to being a character who is a good person and doesn't support Magnifico's evil plans. Amaya became the character that knew information about Magnifico's powers and could give Asha and the teens some clues about how to defeat him. Also, Asha already had 7 friends, and we felt like adding one more was just too many.
They removed it because they somehow just needed her to step up against Magnifico, which relegated everyone in that scene in this entire song. Again, now having characters like Gabo appear as angry and distrusting, but then manages to join into the revolution.
I don't think he's prepared for what's coming. A revolution hit the ground running.
These little minor things, although just small, just don't work for me because they weren't fully fleshed out characters, as I mentioned for the 10th time, no matter how passionate everyone could be. I'm not sure what the hell this even means because you don't even show anything but. All enough again to just appoint to Queen Amaya.
Ain't it nice of us to drop in? To take what's ours, to take it back in. He thinks we're nothing, but we're something else. I've seen too many.
Oh my god, you gotta be kidding me. After all we learned, this is the best we could get for our character? This is the thanks we get? Like, even when I first watched the film and thought it was at least semi-nice for the initial hour in my mind before it eventually broke, this just didn't make sense for me at all in the entire plot. It felt like something was missing and half-earned when she would be used to rise up against her own husband.
He loves one thing more than himself, his crown. Knowing what I know now.
Where this is a scene where the lyrics themselves are trying to justify that point. Like, you see by her own lyrics that she's been with him this entire time and she knows more about him than all of us actually do, now disheartened, wanting to rise up for the better and stop his evil plans.
The good in him, I've watched it melt. I was fooled by the love I felt so profound.
Where nothing about this just makes logical sense because it's all packed and crammed into one singular moment. You didn't get from point A to C in this position, you skipped over B in the middle to get to that point. We lost our chance of something that did work when she was a villain, so now the alternative here was just to have her sing the last line and join into the chorus, to commit to the better so that the kingdom can be happy again or whatever. And I really, really hate that. That is not supposed to work at all. That is a terrible story and it shouldn't exist, where it's all for one thing and one thing only, which of course is to create more references to itself.
Knowing what we know now.
Because in speaking more about these Disney references that the movie loves to make, this is shown in the next scene after they plan, with Magnifico actually destroying the wishes, where he says lines alluding to Disney's past, showcasing Peter Pan flying with the words Fantasyland in the sky.
How about Neverland?
Referencing Mary Poppins.
Perfect nanny for your horrible children. Popping this one!
And of course repeating other villain lines that you knew in the past, as if we didn't need him to call back to another villain.
So much for true love!
Where somehow he just needs to steal a line from Ursula and make him even less unique before all the other villains I just mentioned, and then lazily referencing a defunct Disneyland fireworks show and the land of Fantasyland itself. This is just a great example of overt referencing that destroys the film for what it should be, for the character and the story, because you know that's just not necessary. If you wanted an anniversary film, then you could have actually done more with Once Upon a Studio, or just made that Mickey Mouse film you planned for his 75th birthday or the studio's 50th film, adding all those cameos at the time. Not something like this if the box office is anything to go by. All you're doing is taking everything you had for granted when you had deleted scenes that showcased an actual story that could have actually been done at all. But after this is where Asha runs into the forest as a distraction plan to get the king out while they plan to steal the wishes. Oh yeah, and of course adding more references to Asha as the fairy godmother too, if that wasn't enough from this dreadful sequence we just mentioned. And this part is all about perception, where it seems like it's working, where the king is chasing down Asha and Sabino and the rest actually come back, where Valentino can't count for crap, but the truth suddenly is revealed that Simon was also disguised as Magnifico as he waited back to capture Star for the first time. And at this moment, the plot just seems to get more stupider than you realize, where when you think about it, didn't Hal say he's not prepared for what's coming?
I don't think he's prepared for what's coming.
Right. Oh, well, it looks like that entire line was just wasted because he totally knew the entire time, making everything about that entire sequence of knowing what I know now entirely useless, turning Simon into a complete joke by the Yes Bear and then attacked by cute bunnies. Again, like I said earlier, totally wasted. A tragic fate where he screams at the sight of bunnies, dooming him for an eternity, compared to that deleted scene I just showed you where he actually did join the crew to help to rescue the family and Dahlia. Like, just why? What the hell is this film even? It doesn't make any sense. And speaking of deleted scenes again, I have to share you the last one, which is balanced between what should have been used but totally got it when they actually had the characters of Star and Magnifico meet earlier in the film, changed for the fact that Asha and Magnifico could go against each other. This matched the earlier versions of the film with villainous Amaya, where he usually ate people's wishes when he didn't get what he wanted, where he kinda turns into this crazed monster by the looks of things that actually makes much more sense in terms of his power and involves more than just green magic for the sake of it to raise the platform higher or whatever. Because now, in the actual finished film, instead of seeing it progress gradually and have other factions against them from the start, everyone is just somehow just forced to see that and accept that their king is a monster, where the greater problem with the scene is quite literally everything. The queen, the dorks, and her family are now forced to watch him take the star for himself while capturing Asha at the same time to gloat for victory, where literally they just wrote the entire story into a corner, making him too powerful to even stop with his pitiful green magic that does nothing but glow to remind you of his villainous nature while capturing Star within his staff. It's just insane to think that this was the direction they needed to have him to face off because of the fact that nobody but him has power at all. Like, when I mentioned something like that, we mentioned earlier how they deleted the scenes with Star talking and shape-shifting because they thought that would be too powerful for Asha to handle. Well, this is what I meant when they actually made Magnifico that too powerful villain at the same time, and they backed it into a corner where Asha and the others don't know exactly how to defeat them. Also in that deleted scene I just mentioned, Star also talked in that version too, so that kind of gave you what the story was going for at the time. Because at this moment, Asha can't really do anything other than being hit by Magnifico's staffs a couple of times in the film. She's just too powerless to help, where he also changed everyone down in the kingdom to do nothing, where they can't really do much with those characters compared to the other Disney villain defeats we have seen in a climactic battle, and results in the only solution being the final song in This Wishes reprise, the worst scene in the entire film. And this is probably the biggest mistake they've ever done because of how shallow everyone was delivered at this point. That the climax of the film does not involve a great battle like most Disney villains usually do, but singing in this part.
So I look out at the stars, just like me.
Yeah, singing is how they're going to defeat them, guys. Singing. No fights, no trickery, but singing. And this is justified by what we learned earlier, that everyone is made of stars again. Remember that song, guys? That is how it's used in the final film, other than this pointless backstory that didn't explain anything. All done for the fact that he could be defeated properly.
So I make this wish. So I make this. So I make this wish.
This isn't how Disney villains should be defeated. Nobody puts a song at the climactic battle of the film because it makes no sense whatsoever, even if it is a fairy tale film. Most defeats usually involve tense moments that results in someone's death or demise. At no point in Disney history has this ever been done before until now, because they knew what the story needed in that sense that proved the hero's complete journey. But somehow, this song and the people can ultimately defeat Magnifico to be self-absorbed into the staff just because.
We've had generations of expectations, wondering why and wondering when. We're past dipping our toes in, we know it's do or die, it's sink or swim.
Nothing, and I mean nothing we did was earned or rewarded in a badly unfinished story.
We were all confusing your promises for protection, but we know what we've gotta do. Hope unchanging with our wish held high, the way you always taught us to.
Are you actively trying to make me sympathize with your villain at the end of the story? Because I'm really feeling for him in this moment, where Asha's smug face just puts me off the wrong way, not doing anything but singing. That just literally seems like a parody movie of Disney movies at itself and not an actual one.
So I looked out at the stars just like me, and throw caution to everyone.
How do you really justify any of this and what happened at the beginning? Just please, make it make sense. Oh, but it doesn't matter anyway, because they free the wishes and now people have the chance to pursue it themselves in the kingdom. That doesn't even make them pay rent or get taxes, to be honest. Like again, it just frees them all to commit to the happy ending because we are almost out of time. It's unrewarded because what we learned earlier, that some wishes could have been a danger and what could or could not be granted. Not saying that they will, because it's mostly up to the oh wait, Star actually gave her a wand and now she's like fairy godmother, and now she could grant wishes that she wants. Oh brother. Yeah, like I said, it just doesn't make any sense because there usually is a two-way street that makes sense, but they never committed to that just because the villain now has to be justified, but actually wasn't defeated by everyone's collective desire of singing. We're now near the tail end of the plot. Simon now comes back at the end apologizing where they forgive him so easily for the sake of tying up loose ends. Nothing rewarded for his story at all, that was shallow just like the rest of the characters, where Amaya also officially becomes queen while seeing Magnifico trapped in a mirror, condemning his entire fate to the dungeon to become the magic mirror too, because you know, you can't stop with the references, just like having this windy character work with Peter to build a flying machine if that couldn't be any more obvious at the end, and then also having Valentino say this word.
I dream of a utopian metropolis where all mammals are equal, and wear clothes.
Ugh, please end this already. Whereas we could see, the final moment comes down to Sabino getting to accomplish his wish, entertaining the people, finally ending this happily ever after with Star in the sky and a hidden Mickey firework to remind you what year this is. Ending with a recap of every Disney film, which unfortunately does not actually include all of them as they miss Meet the Robinsons for some reason in this part, and also the package films, but nobody cares about that. Where of course in totality, this fails as an anniversary film in that regard. Where all in all, this just represents what the final product of Wish is. A product and nothing more than that to celebrate its past of 100 years without making something that made them stand tall for 100 years in the first place. That this is the studio that remains to be the oldest of all modern Hollywood, responsible for the techniques that most people do practice today in animation, but still delivers nothing in return for that movie called Wish. Because the simple truth is the fact that this movie is about nothing. Never wanted to be something more than that because it relied heavily on the fact that it had to be that movie released during their 100th year. Not learning any lesson from before that got them to this rough spot in the first place and why they're suffering as a result. Where again, as we found, this does indeed suck because it had such potential to perform with its story, with those deleted scenes that could have been great and the overall idea that Disney movies are connected with in Wishes that makes it special as it wants to be, but how they just chose not to in order to fulfill a simple need that modern Disney executives and probably Hollywood in general thinks that's good enough for its modern audience. And learning about the behind the scenes footage of the film, I still do respect all who were involved with this film, having a passion for Disney storytelling from its music and its lyrics and its story, but just never moved fully to make it in order to satisfy self-references that makes it sadly into a parody. I respect them so much, but I just wish they could do better than this. And the box office results just confirm that to how most people actually feel about it. Not as bad as Strange World, which now most days people have simply forgotten by how bad it was in terms of its financial performance, but still a dire representation of everything wrong with modern Disney storytelling and the overall management, and why it didn't make as much money as it needed to be profitable. Wish is a movie that you don't hate, since it's an idea that could have been great with its characters that do have a lot of charm and are still fun to watch, but still just not enough to satisfy anyone anymore. Or maybe if they did something like that, it would have been received a bit better, actually giving more time to work on what we saw in those deleted scenes that actually had a story with it. Because looking at all this footage I just showed you, I guarantee this movie probably would have been a bigger hit by how much international audiences actually reacted more to this movie than the domestic audiences at the box office, more than other animated films released at the same time. Yes, the other animated films like Trolls and Migration made much more money here domestically because they did enjoy that, where by that performance alone, you know that Disney is beloved universally, where we know that they can do better than what it once was, that there was a reason why all of that animation history was there in the first place and why they should exist too. Because people like me love Disney and have a passion for the studio and the company to do more. They have talent and creativity beyond our own imagination, and it's why I love them so. The passion these people have are what makes me love it, and I will continue to do so for all of eternity as long as I see fit. That these stories are just a part of us as much as those who work on it, and will continue to live on for the next 100 years until we are done. Where no matter what happens, based on that passion I just explained, I will continue to fight for that passion that I have at Disney, either loving or hating what they can produce, as long as that passion and creativity is still there in the world for the betterment of tomorrow. Remind us that these stories we hold are indeed special, that they bring us together within music and storytelling, where I leave you with this simple wish: to never stop dreaming for what you want, as it will come true if you have that courage to pursue it to your heart's content. Just like mine and my pursuit of making Disney animation the best it could be, where I would like to say, long live Disney animation. Your best is yet to come. I'm all done now, so goodbye.